Welcome to School's Out with Sam So르보, a series about education, what you don't know, what you should know, and what to do about it. Because if you think status quo, business as usual will get your kids an education, you're just fooling yourself. Today we will be discussing self-doubt as you consider the challenges of bringing your children home for their education and taking on what is considered by the establishment to be a tremendous burden. Do you feel overwhelmed and inadequate to the task of educating your kids? Stay tuned for some reassurance and guidance. What are the indisputable attributes of a good teacher? There are only two things: more knowledge or wisdom than the student, and a willingness or desire to impart such information. That's it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, it can't be that simple. But think about it. For a moment, try to step outside the school paradigm and consider the best teachers you had, including those who weren't in the school institution. All they had was some information and the desire to give it to you. Even your parent, frustrated at your inability to adequately clean the kitchen, wasn't a certified, pedigreed kitchen cleaning expert, but she or he taught you, perhaps through gritted teeth, how to load the dishwasher and how to adequately clear and wipe down the counters with the proper cleaning supplies. It really just is that simple. Why? Because human beings know how to communicate, and they use that skill to spread knowledge. It's part of the reason we are still here, while the dodo bird is not. Not only that, but most humans actually enjoy teaching because we recognize that it's a form of helping others, and we are charitable. You know you want to. So just admit it. It's exciting to help people learn. Like teaching someone how to ride a bike and then watching them take off, thrilled with the pleasure of this new accomplishment, feeling the cooling breeze in their hair, having them come back to you with the glow of self-satisfaction and appreciation for you. It's fun. So, where the heck did it all go so wrong? Why do we think of teaching like a job that no one wants except the sainted teachers who are all underpaid and overworked and underappreciated because they are obviously doing the grunt work that no one else can, that's fundamentally crucial to the children and their parents and society at large? Most teachers go into the profession because they recognize their love for teaching others. Some of them, maybe not. But by systematizing the teaching methods and the materials, the bureaucracy effectively takes all the fun out of it. My friend's dad taught 8th grade science for 35 years. People's reactions upon hearing that were typically, wow, 35 years of puberty? He retired early, and who could blame him? A better question might be, how'd he stick it out for 35 years? I'll tell you how. First, it was a different time. Students in the small Midwestern town respected their teachers and mostly followed fairly strict rules. In a tightly knit community where everyone knew each other, the occasional punishment was swift and commensurate with the crime. And then there were the days when this teacher put on a movie for the class and headed to the teacher's lounge for the hour. He loved the kids, but even he could only take just so much, just like us all. Unfortunately, the institution has turned teaching into a profession. That makes it seem like some kind of special pedigree, but it isn't. Do you remember the old adage, those who can't, teach? Okay, so that's also kind of unfair. There are folks who love to teach so much they pursue it as a career. But that isn't to the exclusion of everyone else. I'm not a plumber, but I've changed a faucet and installed a toilet. In fact, that's the entire business philosophy of Home Depot and Lowe's. So this understanding should actually inspire you to DIY, do it yourself, for your children. Because all the school teachers are doing is the same stuff you learned in school, except now it's been perverted by Common Core, critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and other manifestations of wokeness, which, strangely, is pretty much the antithesis of actual education. While revising and revamping, notice please, I didn't say improving. The time-honored methods previously employed to teach the younger generations, the experts, have removed logic from math and virtue from education. More on all of that later. Let's start with a few qualifications for the parent-teacher. Feel free to check all of these that apply. You love your children. You desire their success in life. You accept that the changing world calls for a change in strategy. You are open to possibilities. Did you notice how all the ground rules start with you? It's entirely on you. But please, don't let that intimidate you. It should inspire you. Now, think about how many of these items are confirmed by the teachers inside the school buildings, or the administrators for that matter. Maybe yes, maybe no. Do you really know when you drop off your child? After all, children are typically randomly assigned to teachers, and the other administrators probably never get to know your children at all. Certainly not like you do. Furthermore, dropping your kids off at the school gate does not absolve you from responsibility. It just puts you in the back seat of the bus while a drunk driver careens it over a cliff. You and your spouse chose to have the kids, and now you get to run the show, at least until they turn 18. If you agree about those core elements, then we can begin the process of refining your views on education and, yes, child rearing, including how you see yourself in the whole process. Because as we covered in the previous episode, you've been conditioned. And part of that conditioning has been to disengage you from your parental authority and responsibility. We'll cover more of that in a future episode also. A tremendous number of parents, many of them professional teachers, have told me, oh, if I had to do it over again, I would have homeschooled. I always ask, what prompts that disclosure? I've boiled down their answers to a few core sentiments that may surprise you. They just didn't realize how much connection they'd sacrifice with their own kids being in school. They think with the amount their child struggled in school, they could have done a better job at home. The time goes so fast, they felt they had lost a lot of time with the children. They put so much time in at school that would have been better spent with the child. They were too scared, but finally learned they didn't have to be. What's the big takeaway from these comments? By people who have walked this road ahead of you? Regret. They regret not having the knowledge that they now possess. about the schools and their failings, about child raising, its challenges and rewards, and about themselves and their abilities. They regret not keeping their children home and educating them themselves. More importantly, may I point out that they are seeking to teach others now. They want to communicate to you what they've learned about the education system and their kids. Maybe so you won't make the mistakes they made. Their personal experience gives them an understanding of the teaching paradigm that you perhaps have not yet grasped. As a parent, it isn't your job to have all the answers, only to show the child where to look and encourage them to seek. And that's a tough thing to digest because the school paradigm has convinced us that the teacher always has all the answers and that we need permission to ask a question. So, what is the role of a good educator if it isn't to have all the answers? Well, Socrates was considered one of the greatest, and all he did was ask questions. An educator shows others how to learn and encourages them to think. That's much harder to do if you already know all the answers. A true educator should always be on a quest for more knowledge, not assume he already knows it all. Socrates also held that he himself knew nothing. These brave teachers at the end of their child-rearing years are eager to share their experiences and encourage others to make better, more informed choices for their families, even though it flies in the face of the establishment, because the establishment holds that you cannot teach unless someone else says you can. How dare they? Ah, yes, that's a very good question. Well, they dare because they control the messaging, and they manifested this message every day you went to school. You don't actually think that you need a higher degree to teach a second grader that 2 + 2 is 4. You feel it viscerally because the school paradigm was ingrained in you and reinforced the whole school year long. That's why when people picture homeschooling, they see a mom bending over the kitchen table with her child with an open book, or a dad standing at the home's blackboard. I admit it, I installed a blackboard in my house. Why? Because that was my comfort level. It's what I grew up with, what I knew about school. It made sense to me. Never mind that we never used it except one time in 8 years. The blackboard is a tool for lecturing. Who loves to sit and be lectured to? No one. The blackboard and whiteboard is useful for teaching large groups of people, not necessarily in a home setting. But the blackboard is more than that. It's a symbolic representation of learning. Okay, so I'm not entirely knocking blackboards. Restaurants use them, and other places too, probably. But folks, they are outdated like our school system. I'm just saying they are symbolic, and used in a home they would be in a classroom. They aren't as effective or necessary as one might initially assume. Logically, this makes sense, right? But we gravitate toward what we know, get too far outside our comfort level, and we get squeamish, which is why there is such a reluctance to homeschool and why the schools have such a lock on teaching. We need to break that, and it all starts with you. You have ideas about education, what it looks like, goals, strategies, etc. We need to break those down and analyze them, test them for credibility and efficacy, because when we consider the source our failed education bureaucracy, all of our ideas become somewhat suspect. Just because you grew up with a certain standard and you turned out okay doesn't mean it was the correct or even the best model for education. If it was, well, you wouldn't need to watch this program. You'd already be happily homeschooling or self-teaching. Sometimes our social mores don't reflect truth. College prep and career readiness has turned out to be quite the lie, more than they could afford for the promise of a return on their investment, a job paying enough to pay back their loans. Why is there such an uproar about the government now paying off student debt? Well, the student loans are the only loans under the law that you cannot escape, even through bankruptcy. Who wrote that law? The teachers' unions? The university lobbyists? School debt will haunt you until you die, perhaps longer. I'm not supportive of the government's student loan bailout, mainly because that's how they unfairly saddle all the responsible folks who studied for reasonable, lucrative careers with the accrued debt of the kids who studied West African women's studies, or the potheads who played hacky sack on the quad all day. And that just doesn't seem fair. The problem is that government, in the guise of the schools, convinced everyone that college was for them. So, when it comes down to brass tacks, the government is really responsible for the student loan crisis in this country. But rather than take over the debt for these losers, let's change the system. Let's get government out of our schools and out of the education game entirely. If the government isn't going to teach proper civil behavior or civics, then it shouldn't be involved, period. So, let's discuss that for a moment. You must know by now that more youth voted for the avowed socialist Bernie Sanders in the previous election than voted for both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump combined. Why is that? Because the schools teach that government is the answer. The government's teaching children to depend on it. That is the antithesis of our American capitalist system, and, not less important, it eliminates both freedom and prosperity for your children. So whose side are you on? The government's or your child's? You need to decide. Regardless of how you feel about your qualifications to teach your child. Tough, right? But there's good news, because your feelings of inadequacy are much more easily remedied than the entire U.S. education system. You only know what you know, but you can also learn. For instance, when you were a kid, a beautiful birthday cake seemed like a little bit of magic. It looked like a difficult thing, requiring a good deal of effort to make it taste so yummy. But when you were older, you learned how to bake a cake by following a simple recipe, and you realized you were more than capable. Teaching your own children is a similar paradigm. For the younger years, you already have all the knowledge. You can create or buy a recipe in the form of curriculum and simply follow along. Yes, it really is that simple. If you are struggling with making your child sit still or having him mind you, well, those are parenting issues, not academic ones. And we'll cover those in another episode. Get a collection of recipes, curricula, and get started. We'll have an episode about curricula, too. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, understand that just by being present with your child, showing her the ropes of reading and some math, you are opening a new world to her. Please, whatever you do, do not try to replicate the failed institution. Have fun. Remember, your child is on a path to discovery. Monotony was the old way. Also, please understand that the feeling of inability that the school experience imposed on you is an illusion. It's false. It will take years for it to leave you. Embrace it. Use it to reassure you. Every time you get that pit of fear or insecurity in your stomach, that's what you are saving your child from. You're a hero. If you're starting with older children, understand that they, just like you, have been schooled to think you are incapable and dumb. Sadly, you aided in their misperception when you dropped them off each day at school, messaging that the school knows better than me. And this will take time to undo, and patience. But you are up to the challenge because you have the required attributes of an educator. You love them and you seek their success. You will take on a new role in their lives. But if you deal honestly with your teens, you can form an alliance and guide them in their quest for knowledge and wisdom. More on that in a future episode. Think of it this way. Gardeners plant seeds inside a sheltered environment to allow them to take root and grow when they are most vulnerable. It keeps them protected and nourished until they are stronger, because when they are then transplanted into the real world, they have a better chance to survive and thrive. You don't have to be a professional botanist to understand that much. Our children face unseen, untested challenges in the public school system that some would argue are meant for harm. The administrators charged with protecting and nurturing our kids have either fallen asleep at the wheel or are corrupted themselves. Protecting your children demands more from you, perhaps than you imagined, but you can do it, and we can help. Insecurity about education is simply part of the territory. Sadly, it's been baked into the system for a while. My first book on the subject, They're Your Kids, An Inspirational Journey from Self-Doubter, me, to homeschool advocate, well, that kind of says it all. Your feelings of inadequacy are completely understandable because that serves the bureaucracy. But you need not surrender. You've done other things you didn't feel prepared for it in the past. This is simply one of those times. You want what's best for your children, and you're just the person to provide it for them. In future episodes, we will cover essential skills for transitioning your older child out of the system, patience, and where to find it, and many more parts of the education of your family. Self-teaching, or homeschooling, is just as much about the parent as the child. Embark on this journey by embracing the adventure. You are more capable than you think. Thank you for joining me on School's Out with Sam Sorbo. We'll see you next time.